All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the award-winning Sales Game Changers podcast. My name is Fred Diamond. Of course, I'm the co-founder of the Institute for Excellence in Sales. And Mike and Joe, the hosts of the Sales Game Changers podcast, we're over 650 shows. We've had about 2.5 to 3 million interactions. We also use the podcast to write our first book, Insights for Sales Game Changers. Book is available up on Amazon. Of course, if you'd like some signed copies, reach out to me on LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever it might be. We'd be thrilled to get them to you. We transcribe every Sales Game Changers podcast that we do. You can find all the transcriptions at salesgamechangerspodcast.com. And Mike, since this is the first time we've had you on the Sales Game Changers podcast, go to salesgamechangerspodcast.com/Mike Weinberg, and you could read the complete transcription of today's show. And Joe Tarulli, we're going to have you on the future. We'll give you your own URL tag after we do your specific show, but I'm really excited. We got Mike Weinberg on today, and a lot of people know Mike for his classic Sales Management Simplified. Well, Mike just published another book, which I think is fantastic. It's called The First Time Manager. Mike, how do you say the name? Is it The First Time Manager Sales, or is it The First Time Sales Manager? How exactly have you titled the book?
I think the publisher would have you say The First Time Manager Sales, because this is part of an expanded series of books they're building around a really successful book called The First Time Manager. So
gotcha. All right. Well, we got Mike Weinberg today, the author of The First Time Manager Sales. And whenever I get a request from an author or a sales speaker, and we get dozens every week, I always say, I'd be happy to have you on the show if you could bring a bona fide VP of sales level professional with you. And I want to applaud you, Mike, for bringing on Joe Tarulli. He's the general manager or sales leader at Pyrotek. So we're going to have a fun conversation today with one of the true thought leaders on sales management and someone that's applying that. So I'm very, very excited. All right. I've said this many, many times on the Sales Game Changers podcast that the hardest job, I think, in any company is first-time sales managers. Mike, especially over the last couple of years, a lot of people were promoted in January of 2020, right, to their sales management role. And then 2 months later, we're all sent home. So I think that provided a huge disservice to a lot of the sales managers that are in a very, very challenging role to begin with. Talk a little bit about that. Talk about why first-time sales manager is such a difficult role to begin with. And then let's get deep into some of your advice, some of Joe's advice for them.
Yeah, that's great. Let me just start by saying thank you. You're really generous, and what a treat to be invited to join you on this show, Fred. It's been great knowing you for the last probably decade or so, and I'm thrilled to be here and share with you. And it was not hard to pick a sales leader to join me. Joe was the first person I tapped, so thank you for the invite, and I think the audience will gain as much or more from him as from me. To your question, why is it so hard to be a first-time sales manager? We could almost drop off the first time and just deal with the frontline sales manager. And we've talked about this a lot, but that's the hardest job there is. Everybody wants a piece of you, right? Whether it's your own people, your underperformers that are scared of their shadow, or your top people who are high maintenance and difficult, or customers that use you as the punching bag. And then on the other side, internally, I mean, how many senior leaders and companies have lost sight of the sales manager's primary job and bury them in all kinds of crap and divert them and distract them and send them, dozens of emails in a day asking for information. So the frontline manager job is hard enough. And I'll just say this now, and I'm sure this theme will weave its way through our whole dialogue. It's not only the hardest job, I would argue it's the most critical job. This is the person who's leading the team that drives revenue. So the pressure is enormous. And I shifted the focus of my business probably 6 or 7 years ago to spending more time with sales leaders, because when you get that right, everything changes. So that's at the macro level, the frontline manager is the most critical and the hardest job. It's doubly or triply hard for the new manager. And I'll throw one big reason out right now, is that the job of leading the team is almost nothing like the job of being an individual contributor salesperson. And the title of chapter 2 in the new book is really straightforward. It says, your new job in management is nothing like your old job in sales. In fact, the only thing that's similar is the word sales. But you go from being selfish to being selfless. You go from winning on your own to having to win through other people. You go from a place where if your ego is a little bit big, that actually kind of helps you in sales. but that destroys you as a manager. So it's a really tough transition. And speaking like in the first person, if you read my first management book, Sales Manager Simplified, I outline my struggles. To say that I was struggling or flailing would be an understatement as a new manager. I had a really hard time making that adjustment. So that was one of the motivations when the publisher asked me to write this book, because I could relate to those challenges.
Yeah, as I was reading your book, it was one of those books where almost like every page, I'm like, yes, yes, oh, yes, absolutely. Especially, I want to talk after I get Joe's initial thoughts. I want to talk about that particular thing that you just mentioned. Can individual contributors be successful in sales? And typically, although you talk about other ways to get into sales management, typically it's like, oh, you're a high performer. So obviously the next step would be, I've spoken to a lot of people over my career, as I'm sure both of you have too, who have said their worst 2 years in their career was the 2 years they were promoted into sales management. So we'll talk about that in a second. Joe, give us some insights. Tell us a little bit about Pyrotek, and give us some of your thoughts on what Mike just started us off with.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. And again, really appreciate you having us on. Pyrotek is an international organization. We have about 3,200 employees. Primary focus is the aluminum industry, so helping customers who actually make aluminum and make parts out of aluminum. I've been with the company for 25 years. Started off in sales, and then was promoted to sales management, and then was involved in sales leadership for about 12 years. And about 4 years ago, I was asked to run a couple of our business units. So I have full P&L responsibility, including sales, obviously, for those two business units for Pyrotek. And I think what resonates for me, based upon what I've heard so far, is the fact that, A, I agree 100%. The sales manager role is probably the most difficult in the organization, certainly in the sales organization. And what attracted me first to Mike's work, and the title of his first book, Sales Management Simplified, is just that. It was so simple and actionable. And that's what I'm looking for, right, as a sales leader. So we actually, even before that time, had organized our efforts to really focus on the sales manager role. And so when Mike's material came out, there were so many things we could just grab immediately and apply to that training. We have about 35 sales managers, Fred, and about 250 sales engineers. So not a huge organization, but not small either. So finding things we could implement immediately and have a real impact was what we were looking for.
All right, so let's get right to it. So, as sales professionals transition into sales management, obviously there are significant changes in not just in the job function, but probably in life as well. You mentioned before, Mike, you said selfish versus selfless. Now I'm going to guess also your role in the company has been elevated, right? You're not part of a team. Now you're managing X number of people. There are significant responsibilities, not just your $1 million quota, but 8 people hitting their number, whatever the number might be. So there's significant changes and challenges. So talk about some of the differences between the two roles that you want to focus on and that you focused on in the book. And then Joe, after Mike gives this answer, I'm kind of interested in your transition, when you made the transition for individual contributor to sales manager and then also sales leader as well.
Sure.
So Mike, why don't you go first?
Yeah, it's a fun conversation. I'm going to go back to something you started to highlight a little bit, Fred. It's more than just the selfish versus selfless. That's where it starts, but where it plays itself out is how you win. And one of the biggest challenges I see across the board in organizations right now is sales managers, and particularly new sales managers, who take on this hero persona. They're going to show their team how to do it, and they're going to sell for everybody, and they're going to be in every big meeting, and they're going to get their people to sell just like them. And they don't make this pivot to learning how to win through others as opposed to winning for others. Right. And it's not scalable. It's not sustainable. The job of the leader is to multiply him or herself into their people. And there's a very big difference between doing and leading or coaching or holding people accountable. And that's the really big pivot. And what's interesting is I've been teaching that for a while. The dangers and consequences when the manager plays hero, from burnout to stunting the development of people to damaging culture and careers. I mean, to the lack of fun working for a micromanager, or, even I talked about ego earlier. Ego in a salesperson is not a bad thing, but that ego gets really old when the boss wants all the credit and is, instead of like protecting you, they're throwing you under the bus, right? And instead of getting behind you and rallying for your winning, they're trying to steal the credit so they look like they're the one getting it all done. That always happens, but oh my gosh, in the new manager world, it's even harder. And that was, if we could get managers, whether they're seasoned or first time managers, to let go and focus more on we have two giant levers as sales leaders: accountability and coaching. And if we would master those two fundamentals, I cannot tell you what would happen to sales results and culture. And I'll yield there because I know Joe has a lot of thoughts on this. So, and he's one of the few people, he's my wise and mature client and friend. I always joke when I'm flying off the handle and being all emotional, he's kind of the calm one whispering like mature advice in my ear. But Joe, you're one of those people that really enjoyed that transition. Like I didn't enjoy it. And I got a lot of clients and friends that was a struggle. It was more natural for you to become a leader. So did you pick it up?
Yeah, happy to. So it was a more natural progression for me because I was a student of sales, right? When I started off in selling, I wasn't very good at it. I knew I had to get better. I read a lot of books. I listened to a lot of cassette tapes going back to the 80s and uh, webinars later on. And for me, it kind of clicked early on that my role was to be that coach and that mentor and that trainer and to help the team succeed. So for whatever reason, I'm not sure exactly why I went down that path, but it certainly served me well in my sales manager role. To Fred's point, when I went from a sales engineer to a sales manager with a team of 8 people, and then into my sales leadership role, really understanding that the way to leverage that success was to invest in the frontline sales manager and then have them be the coach, mentor, and trainer of their teams. And that's been a big win for Pyrotek, big game changer.
Joe, I'm kind of curious, based on your experience, um, what percentage of people have you seen be successful going from individual contributor into sales management? And if someone's struggling, can you get them on course, or do you realize quickly, gee, we never should have put that guy or lady into sales management? And Mike, I'm kind of curious on your thoughts as well. It's kind of like, are sales managers born, or are they trained, if you will? And of course, you do this for a living, so that's part of what people bring you in, guys like Joe. So, what are some of your thoughts, Joe? Is it a natural transition? Are most of them going to fail, or most of them going to succeed? And can they succeed if they're struggling, frontline sales managers?
Yeah, I think Fred, for me, the chances of success go up exponentially if we're really doing good vetting on the front end, because oftentimes the top producer is not going to be the best manager for the reasons Mike said. They're going to have a hard time letting go. They're going to feel some pressure, so they're going to jump in at every opportunity. They're going to think they need to do it on their own. Whereas the best sales managers are going to be those that actually get that, okay, and understand that empowering my team and sometimes letting them fail, okay, but giving them the tools and the support and the training, those are the ones that are going to be successful. So I would say if you're not doing really any vetting and you're taking your top guys and gals and saying, look, you're going to be the manager, the chances of failure go up quite a bit. If you actually do the vetting like any other interview process and find out, A, first of all, do they want to do it? Because not everyone does. B, what their attitude is, or their willingness to adapt and change, your chances of success are going to go up quite a bit.
Joe,
Before
keep
I
going
turn
for
it,
a minute. Let me just, Joe, because I know some stuff that Joe has done in his own company would be valuable for the listeners. Joe, I agree with you. And I think a lot of people, they get the vetting is important. And then some people like me, as an example, I had a rough transition, but became very good at it. But you're doing something at your company. I mean, you have a sales manager certification program, right? You took this seriously before we even met. You had created programs as head of sales development for your organization where you helped people become good leaders and managers. I just think that the audience, and what it's so unique. I think the listeners would benefit hearing. Just talk a little bit about the genesis of that program and what you actually train sales managers to do, because it's so powerful, because we see how they've ramped up in competence and effectiveness. So
Yeah, so before we even met, Mike, you're right. We did make that shift to really focusing in on the sales managers, and we established a sales leadership council where we took our top sales managers from around the world and spent a week together at various locations. and really poured into them and got best practices and really did a train the trainer approach. Because again, we could not train 250 sales engineers with a small team. We needed help from the sales managers. So that was kind of key to kicking that off. But then after reading Sales Management Simplified, the certification process actually came about where we take those 3 high value activities you talk about all the time: the one-on-one accountability meetings, the local sales meetings, the in-field coaching, and we built a certification program around that. So it's self-reporting. So the sales managers report, their managers have to sign off. But the cool thing is we have actual metrics around it. So we did some baselining before, we did baselining after, and I've shared these figures with Mike. In the first year we did it, Fred, the GP percentage for those managers' teams who were certified was 3% higher than the non-certified sales managers. Our win rate was 7% higher on opportunities. Our activities of our sales engineers, FaceTime with customers, was about 20% higher. So all those things paid huge dividends and real dollars to the bottom line for the company. And it was really based around those 3 key activities.
No, that is great to hear what's going on. Thanks, Mike, for having Joe communicate that with us. Yeah, at the Institute for Excellence in Sales, we're proud of our Premier Women in Sales Employer and Premier Sales Employer designations. Mike, I'm just kind of curious. You work with hundreds of companies. You've met hundreds of guys like Joe. Is what Joe just described, is that kind of normal? Is it an anomaly? 10% of your companies that you've worked with? I would say it's a very small percentage of companies that we work with have that type of thought process in place. So I'm glad that you asked Joe to further expand on that.
Oh, that's why I wanted him on the show. I mean, he's in the upper echelon. That what they're doing there is beyond. It's not even 10%. And I'm in some companies that everybody knows the name of. Not everybody may have heard of Pyrotek before today, but I'm in some companies where you know who they are. And I walk in there and I'm looking at the sales management development program and how they bury these poor people and how senior executives have completely lost the grip on what a sales manager is supposed to do to drive culture and results. They're not doing anything like this. And in his world, they're not just laying out some metrics. They're coaching them on how do you do a better job doing accountability? How do you do a better job getting out and actually coaching and working alongside your people and coaching sales skills and coaching the deal, right? And how do you run better sales team meetings that equip and energize? Like do you know how much less business I would have if there were more Joe Tarullis and more companies that were doing that? And it's fun that they still invite me back. They don't really need me. They just like having me around. And I'm affirming what they're doing, but we'd be a whole lot better off if big companies and small companies were investing in salesmen. I'll just say this: it's from a matter of conscience. I get calls all the time because of the popularity of my first book, New Sales Simplified. Everybody wants sales training. Help my people do a better job bringing in new business. And I'm a sales nerd. I wrote that book, and I'm happy to talk about targeting and messaging and prospecting and consultative sales calls and owning the pipeline and the calendar, which are the basics for developing good new business. But in my conscience, I have to look at executives and go, I can help you with that, but can we talk about sales leadership and culture and right people in the role and compensation and accountability and coaching and pointing the team? Because all that is leadership responsibility. And if that stinks, I don't care if you pay me $1 million to train the salespeople, nothing will change. So it's in my own, it's a matter of conscience and integrity to go, if you don't get the big sales management stuff right, nothing else really matters.
Yeah, well, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I was going to mention, Fred, we've actually taken it even a step further. We've developed some of our Power BI reporting around those, one-on-one accountability meetings. So we have results and pipeline and activities, which is really taking Mike's template and formalizing it within Pyrotek so that all the information is served up. It makes the meetings very quick and easy, and we can really focus in on what we need to do to move the needle.
I have a different question I want to ask you here. And Mike, you did a great job in the book talking about your early sales career, some of the leaders that you worked for. And I liked what you were just saying a few seconds ago about what sales leaders you think about today. I was interviewing someone for my podcast the other day. Again, we're talking today with Mike Weinberg, the author of The First Time Manager Sales, and Joe Tarulli, general manager for sales development at Pyrotek. And I was talking to a sales manager who said that he has a new sales professional who's in his 20s and he wants feedback every day. He says he wants to hear every day, "How'd I do today, boss?" Type of a thing. And the guy said to me, I got my review every 6 months, and I knew where I was, and where I'm going. But this whole generation wants to be, not necessarily coddled, but constantly given feedback and the ability to get the feedback. I'm kind of curious on both of you from a general perspective. Obviously, sales needs to bring in the revenue. First and foremost, and Mike, you do a great job in the first couple chapters talking about the types of meetings and the types of things sales managers need to have with their people to understand, where is the revenue, where's it coming from, what's the pipe look like, et cetera. I want to give us kind of like an overview today. And Joe, you go first on the sales manager role. Mike alluded to coaching and leadership, et cetera. Give us some of your thoughts on managing the people today. And I'll be very succinct, people in their 20s, from a sales management leadership perspective. How do you manage that organization? How do you, that group of people, and how do you coach your people to be more successful at that?
Yeah, it's interesting, Fred. I think the human aspect obviously is probably the most challenging part of any management role, right? And I think the landscape has shifted significantly as the millennials and now the Gen Zs are coming into the workforce. And quite frankly, we've had numerous conversations within my organization on the challenges of motivating and coaching these 20-year-old managers, because we have them. And so there's no clear-cut answer, because again, I have noticed also they do want that kind of constant affirmation that they're doing the right job. So again, I think setting up a regular cadence of the one-on-ones, and we pick monthly, maybe for some people it's bi-weekly or weekly, but giving that feedback, I think, is important to make sure that they know that they're either on track or need to make a course adjustment. But yeah, it's a tough challenge. I'm curious if Mike has any wise words on this.
No, I like where the conversation is going. I think there's two pieces to one-on-ones. There's coaching and there's accountability. And I think when someone's asking for feedback, how am I doing? That doesn't necessarily mean we need to pull out the pipeline on a daily basis, because that feels redundant and awkward, particularly if they're selling something that's not that transactional and the sales cycle is more than an hour, right? If it's so, but I think what we're hearing is a craving for some affirmation and some support. And that's our job, right? We have two levers. I said this before. One is accountability and the other one is coaching. And coaching takes on lots of different aspects. And I'm personally mentoring a handful of people in their 20s right now, some of the friends of my own sons and some of my own family friends, their sons, right? So it's a very interesting dynamic. What I'm finding is it's simply some check-ins and a coffee and a question or two holistically about the person, because I don't like when everybody paints generations with a broad brush, because there are lots of 25-year-olds today who are really driven and really responsible and not insecure and not looking for some safe zone to hide in, right? And they're doing a great job in their career. But having said that, there is this understanding that you're hiring a whole person and the person wants to be cared for. And there are little things we can do as leaders that demonstrate that we care without driving ourselves crazy or turning our entire calendar upside down. And if it's as simple as putting a reminder in our calendar every 4 days to check on Joey, your young person, and send them an encouraging note, or ask how this one thing went, or send them a link to some cool thing you saw on Netflix on some show you think he's interested in. It's a way of making the person feel valued and that you're in touch with them and want to see them be successful. One of the most powerful things in the whole book was a quote from our mutual friend, Joe, Mike Jeffrey, who's a sales executive at Paychex. And he may have been the star of our video series, right? When I had him in the room,
Brilliant.
Brilliant, and always has a pithy thing. And he used this analogy. He said, we need our salespeople, particularly our better salespeople, to see us as the bridge, that our job is to get to know them well enough where they trust us, that we're for them. That's from another chapter in the book, but we're not just for them, but that we're going to facilitate taking them from where they are to where they want to be career-wise. And if we could get to the place where they see, this is Mike Jeffrey speaking, if we could get to the place where they see us as the bridge to get them where they want to be, one, they're never going to leave us. Two, they're going to run through walls for us, right? And they're going to be totally receptive to our input and our coaching. But that requires time and, dare I say, love and investment, which is the opposite of what most sales leaders have today, because they get 294 emails and all this data being requested from a CFO and all the, excuse me for saying it this way, but all the bullshit and nonsense that everyone wants them to do as part of their job, which has nothing to do with leading their people, making them better at their skills, or holding them accountable. So if we could help the managers get back to proactive coaching and accountability, we're going to see an enormous sales lift, and we're going to be developing better salespeople who will produce and hit their number at a much higher percent than today's average salesperson hits their quota on any sales team.
So I want to follow up on something that you talked about. Again, when I was reading the book, it was like every page almost, I was like, oh, yes, 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 yes. I have one quick question. When you're talking to your son's friends, do they call you Mike or Mr. Weinberg?
That is such a great question. I make them call me Mike. And for the kids that I know, because they were friends, 10 years ago, it's really hard for them. But I look at them and go, you're 24 years old and you're an adult, and this is a business conversation. And I want you to call me Mike, because
Interesting.
Yeah.
And, I have them call me Mr. Diamond.
That's just my own. Yeah.
When I was at Apple Computer, I was a marketing director for Apple Computer for a long time. And I came to a conclusion relatively quickly that we were going to reach our numbers with 20% of the sales team. So 20% were going to help us reach the numbers that we had quoted. And I said, as a marketing director, it's going to be best used. My time and efforts are going to be better used if I'm supporting our top sales professionals, the ones who have the 100 billion quotas, and they're usually our best people. And the ones who are brand new, who are maybe calling on smaller accounts, if I have time, we'll do some global type things. But I remember I devoted most of my attention to those. In the book, you talk about top performers and how sales leaders need to focus on top performers. Mike, why don't you just talk about that in general, why you included that in the book, why it's so critical? And Joe, I'm interested in your thoughts as well about, the role of sales leadership in ensuring that the top performers are as successful as possible.
Yeah.
Mike, you go first.
Okay. Well, I'll start with this. Nothing hurts worse than losing an A player in sales, because there are so few A player salespeople. So that fact, and that's a fact, that's not an opinion, right? That fact should drive how a manager spends his or her time. Because if it's very hard to replace the top person, then they deserve some extra time and attention. In a minute, I'm going to encourage managers to discriminate as they treat their people, but in a good and legal way, not in an illegal, inappropriate way. But when I was new in management, my dad was coaching me. And he's like, Mike, don't lose sight of your best people. They're the ones that know what to do with your coaching, and they're the ones that can find you the business when you need it. And fast forward 18 years later, I'm doing a giant global engagement for an analytics company that took their own medicine. And they showed me data that said that their top performing sales leaders around the globe, of the 200 leaders they had, the leaders of the highest performing teams, they had the data to show that those leaders spent more than double the amount of time with their best people than the leaders of underperforming teams spent with their best people. It was like the data to back up my dad's anecdote of, 2 decades earlier. So the reality is it's true. Now, I'm not saying to ignore underperformance. The chapter after this is the one about confronting underperformance head on and coaching people up or out. So I'm not advocating ignoring underperformance, but too many of us in management spend all of our time doing admin or fighting with our problem children. And based on what my dad said and what my client in analytics proved out, is if you'd put more time into your best people, you would drive a lot more results. And I would argue you hang on to them, because that's really one of our biggest missions in sales leadership, is to hang on to our best people and to maximize their production. So my last point would be, we should discriminate, not based on race or age or gender or religion. We should discriminate based on performance. Certain people have earned some rule bending and some extra support, and you not asking them to do certain things, and they've earned other ways you can bless them because you need them. And it is not wrong or illegal to treat your people differently based on performance. So I'll yield to Joe, who probably has some very good thoughts here.
Yeah, I think it's very much analogous to take a top tier NFL quarterback who maybe doesn't practice during the week and comes in. He's earned that right. I think, Fred, to your original question, you're going to have the typical bell-shaped curve, right? You're going to have your top performers. You're going to have those that kind of fall in the middle, and you're going to have those that, to Mike's point, we need to either coach up or coach out. But I would agree with both of you. I think you're going to get the biggest impact and the biggest success by focusing in on those A and A minus B plus players. And to Mike's point, certainly not to neglect the others, but that's where you're going to really make those jumps. And if you build a healthy sales culture, you're going to be able to attract more of the A players as well. And one final comment or thought on this: if we're really doing our job as sales managers and we're investing in our people and we're holding them accountable and we're giving them the coaching and training and mentoring they need, what you're going to find is the amount of time that those players from A to C require is going to shrink. And that lets us be much more productive as well. So it really is about staying to the basics and not forgetting that, because it's so easy when things pop up or COVID hits or there's a change in dynamics with millennials or Gen Zs to say, oh, we got to radically change our approach. I would disagree. I think we need to go back to the basics, certainly make some minor tweaks and modifications, but the basic tenets of sales and sales management, my belief is hold true regardless.
Yeah, and Mike goes into great detail in the book about all the things you should be doing. Before I ask you both for your final action step, this is one of those shows that I think we could probably talk to for 3 hours. But you've given us so many great ideas. Before I get to your final action step, just want to ask you both, starting with Joe, if you were advised sales managers on something not to do that you see them doing that is a recipe for disaster, that they continue to do, that's not going to set them up for failure, what would be one thing that you see too often being done that's just not a good use of their time, energy, and profession? And Mike, then I'm interested in your thoughts, and then I'll ask you both for your final action steps.
I'm glad you
Yeah,
asked Joe first, because I need to think about this one.
Well, no, I was going to say our answer is going to be the same. The biggest sin that I see from sales managers is jumping in, being the hero, as Mike says, trying to do it themselves. Again, you may close that one deal, you may, save that one opportunity, but it's not sustainable. It's not developing the team. It's not healthy for the organization in the long run. So again, that's my big thing and again, it's our job as sales leaders to work with our sales managers and coach them and let them know that's not the way to do it. Okay. We
I'm just really
really,
curious. Yeah.
yeah,
Do you see that a lot? As you see, like if someone does it, that they keep doing it, even though you remind them, is that a big problem or is that a one time? Oh yeah, I got it, boss. I'm not going to do it
I,
again.
I think, Fred, if it stays a problem, then you got the wrong person in the role. Okay. Typically after a couple times and letting them know it's okay. All right. To not jump in and save the day. And here's why. I don't see it as a long-term issue, but I think back to our first part of the conversation, if we hire and promote just our top performers to the sales manager role, our chances of that happening go up quite a bit. So that's something we just need to guard against as sales leaders.
That's a great point. Mike, how about you? What's the one thing you would advise against that you see too often?
I'm going to give you two answers. I'm going to pick up on Joe's answer because it's so prevalent. Chapter 5 in the new book says something, the title is something like this: bad things happen when you attempt to do your salespeople's jobs. And it plays itself out in more ways than just jumping in, whether it's in the middle of a sales call or in structuring a deal. It's not assuming the role of the leader. You still stay as the doer. And there's a lot of reasons. And the entire chapter is based around the causes of why we jump in and play hero, and we do instead of lead, coach, and hold accountable. And then I show the awful consequences. And then I take people through a little exercise about where this hero mentality manifests itself. There's also a really cool download at the end of that chapter to do an assessment for yourself. I would say that. But the other thing I think that sales managers are doing, and this is going to sound really weird, they're letting other people set their priorities and put work on their desk. And at the end of the day, one of my other friends just said this out loud. You can check every box. You can do all the compliance stuff for HR. You could attend all the right meetings. You could do all these things that make you in the good boy list under the good corporate citizen behavior. But if your sales team misses the number at the end of the year, no one's going to let you point back to the fact that you did all this good corporate stuff as an excuse for why your team blew it. So my message is to remember that you're leading the team that drives results. Sales is about results, and you don't get paid to do work. You get paid to make results happen. And results happen when you get the right people on your team, you address underperformance and coach up or coach out people who are struggling. And the two levers you have for the people that belong on your team are A, accountability, regularly sticking their results and their pipeline health under their nose so they're aware where they stand. And you do it in a way where you're not micromanaging, chapter 3 of the book. And then chapter 4 is you got to help them get better, which means you work with them. And we need to get better at saying no as the frontline managers to our bosses, or pushing back when the company buries us with all kinds of crazy things and go, wait a second, this is really nice that you have this initiative. What about the trip I had next week to go work with this person in the field for 2 days? Where is that going to happen if you want me to do this? Because the first thing that managers cancel is proactive coaching. When the crap hits the fan and they're overwhelmed, the thing that's not urgent is people development. But that's the thing that makes people better and improves results. So we need, along with not doing other people's jobs, we need to stiffen our spine a little bit, we meaning the frontline manager, and get a better handle on what our high value activities are and protect our calendar. Just like we tell salespeople, you better protect your calendar and time block your prospecting. Because if you don't, it's never going to happen.
Absolutely. Sales management simplified was one of the standards, still is one of the standards in the industry. And I think the first time manager sales is going to achieve that quickly as well. It's so well done, so well written. So kudos to you, Mike Weinberg. I want to thank Mike Weinberg and Joe Tarulli for being on today's show. Again, you can read the complete transcription, salesgamechangerspodcast.com/Mike Weinberg. And Mike, I just want to acknowledge you for the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of sales professionals that you've influenced over your career. We first met you in 2015. We brought you onto the IES Institute for Excellence in Sales onto our stage. And, you've reached the pinnacle of sales thought leader and sales expert. So good for you and all that work. And Joe, congratulations on your success as well. Mike, when we're asking for him to bring someone on board, like he mentioned in the beginning of the show, he said, Joe's the guy, we're going to bring him on definitely. And I did research into, the success of the company, and congratulations to you and the role that you've played and the career trajectory that you've had. Give us your final action step. Again, you guys have given us so many great ideas. There's great ideas all through the book, but Joe, give us something specific and concise right now that sales professionals or leaders should do to take their sales career to the next level.
Yeah, I think for me, it's keep it simple, find a process and stick to it. Okay, I think there's a lot of benefit to consistency. And I think the one-on-one accountability meeting is a great example of that. If you're constantly moving the target and trying different approaches, it's very hard to know where you're making gains and making losses. So I would say pick a methodology. I personally like Mike's content, and we've incorporated a lot of that into what we're doing. But pick a methodology, stick to it, be consistent, and really work with the teams.
Very good. Mike, bring us home. Give us something nice, crisp, and concise people should do right now to take their sales career to the next level.
I think they need to evaluate their calendar and get really focused on the very few things that move the needle when it comes to creating, advancing, and closing sales. If they're in sales, and if they're in management, it's understanding the job is to win through your people. Where do you need to spend more time? And the only way most managers don't need to work harder. It's not a work ethic thing. If anything, most managers are on the edge of burnout. We need to get some things off of their plate and off of their calendar to free them up for the few things, which we've repeated ad nauseum in this episode, because that's what moves the needle. Joe said it 5 different ways: accountability meetings and coaching. If you spend more time with your people, good things will happen. So it's a matter of prioritization and focus and discipline, and some low value stuff has to either be forgotten about and let it fall on the floor, or it's got to be delegated to somebody else, because your people need you and you're impacting their lives and their careers. And the livelihood of your company depends on your people doing their job well. So if you're not investing in making them better and you're not holding them accountable, what are you doing? That's the bottom line.
Absolutely. Once again, my name is Fred Diamond. This is the Sales Game Changers podcast.